Welcome to Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer. This is Dr. Stephen Greer with you today, and I'm joined with me today by Linda Willitts. And we're very grateful to the World Puja Network for hosting us every 2 weeks on this program. And we're going to be discussing today the whole concept of a new cosmology, how the understanding of how the cosmos is ordered and structured gives a deep understanding of how interstellar civilizations interface with our reality, and also gives us a deeper understanding of our own personal reality. So that'll be the focus of today's discussion. Thank you, Linda, for joining us.
Oh, you're welcome.
One of the things that I wanted to share is there's an overview of all of this, and the first book I wrote, which is called Extraterrestrial Contact, the Evidence and Implications, which you can get at disclosureproject.org. And it was written, the history of it is because after we had had a number of contacts with interstellar civilizations and the way the extraterrestrial technologies and beings had appeared, it was very clear to me that there was an overlap between that and other types of experiences people had had, because once you have a civilization capable of going faster than the speed of light, their technology and their whole reality is crossing over, as it were, to what I call beyond the speed of light, the crossing point of light, where you then are in a domain, a trans-dimensional aspect of reality that is the area of consciousness and thought and spirit and astral or etheric energy. And that understanding the way the cosmos is structured is very key to understanding what kinds of experiences one might have or expect to have with extraterrestrial civilizations that are capable of reaching Earth. And I think it's sort of obvious that if they're capable of coming here, and there's abundant evidence through the disclosureproject.org, you can look and see the kinds of evidence that exist, and they're now being released by the French government and the British government and the Danish government and many governments around the world. The question becomes, well, if they're here, how might they appear to us? And, of course, obviously, when they're fully materialized in three-dimensional space-time, they'll look like a disc-shaped object or a triangular object or a tetrahedron or any number of other shaped craft that will be silent and moving rather rapidly through the atmosphere. However, most people who see them up close will see that they just materialize and dematerialize in space. And when they do this, when they're not there visible to the naked eye and fully materialized, but present, they are in a resonant field where you can actually sort of see like a heat wave distortion, or what may look like a sort of an energy form or a burst of light, or any number of other type of phenomenon that people would say isn't the craft itself, but is some evidence of it. And in reality, it is the craft itself. It's just that that's all our eyes are seeing. And I think that what you begin to realize as you begin to study anything that is resonating faster than the speed of light is that it begins to leave evidence of its existence in ways that cross over into other types of experiences people have had, perhaps with astral beings, with angelic beings, people who have had experiences with loved ones who have deceased and passed over into the worlds of light. And there is an overlap. So it's like two intersecting circles where you have the extraterrestrial reality that includes the physical three-dimensional form that we may have with our bodies and spacecraft and the shuttle or the 747. But there's also this other aspect, and that's where the technology has become advanced enough that even the technological manifestations of these civilizations, as well as their own consciousness, are interfacing with what you might call a trans-dimensional aspect of reality that's folded within space-time and yet transcends it. And this is understanding of how the universe is structured beyond what is normally taught in physics is very, very important to understanding the interstellar civilizations, how they appear, how they disappear, and all the things that they may do to appear around us. And I think we've shared some of these over the last a few months with listeners as we've described some of the experiences we've had. And a lot of this will be out in the new book that's coming out in next month. That's going to be called Contact, the Countdown to Transformation, is going to have about 17 years of our experiences, as well as a DVD that shows a lot of this extraterrestrial activity and how they appear and disappear when they're all around us. And it's going to be a very interesting thing for people to see, because it's not what you expect. It isn't as linear as most people expect. It's not as defined as most people would expect. And I think this is where we want to get into this whole concept of the structure of the cosmos, this new cosmology that incorporates not just particle physics and quantum mechanics and astrophysics, which are now well known and well described in science, but what is it that's going on beyond the crossing point of light, as I have called it, where you go beyond the speed of light? What happens when a spacecraft with all of its occupants resonate at a frequency beyond that of the speed of electrons and of matter and of light? What kind of experience is that, and what kind of experience does one have, and how does that relate to other experiences that people may have that are, some would term, either spiritual or mental or in the realm of thought? And I think this is very, very important to understand if one is going to understand what these civilizations are doing as they approach Earth and our civilization, and that we not try to impose a early 21st century scientific paradigm on civilizations that are clearly thousands, and in some cases perhaps millions of years more developed than our current understanding of technology. Now, technology is one thing, but the concepts are actually quite ancient. And if you, since we're on the World Puja Network, if you go back to the ancient Vedas, and this is certainly something that I studied before I became a medical doctor and founder of the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence and the Disclosure Project, my first great love was that of the science of consciousness and the ancient knowledge that are in the Vedas. And what one finds is that the ability to do a number of things, to dematerialize and rematerialize in another point in space, to levitate, which is sort of an anti-gravity effect, but it's involving the conscious body and the physical body, to literally move through a wall and cause your body's resonant frequency to shift so that its resonant frequency is high enough that you can actually walk straight through a wall, even though you're in your physical body. To be able to do many of these things are well described in the Vedic literature and within the realm of what has been called the siddhis, or the Vedic powers, SIDDHIS. And these have been described by many people over the years, and I guess one of the better descriptions would be Yogananda's autobiography of a yogi, where he discusses many of these kinds of experiences that he and other masters that he had studied with had over the course of their lifetime. But I think that this is why it's very important to understand that civilizations that are interstellar are basically have a technological as well as a spiritual and conscious capability that embodies the full knowledge of the Vedas. And this is why this is such a great thing to discuss with the audience on the World Puja Network, where we can make this bridge. I mean, there are very few audiences where, I can really discuss the scientific interface with consciousness and with these understandings of the ancient Vedas and the Vedic knowledge and the siddhis. But this is really what we want to focus on today, because when you deal with a civilization that is traveling from another star system that may be thousands of light years or millions of light years from Earth, and all of a sudden they're in Earth's atmosphere or in our solar system or in a field, and there's a spacecraft there, those craft and those occupants have a full understanding of a type of cosmology that goes way beyond current materialistic reductionist science and crosses from that and bridges from that over into this ancient Vedic knowledge of the science of consciousness and the transdimensional reality and the types of energy forms that matter can take under certain conditions. And this is precisely what people describe. If you look at the UFO, so-called UFO literature, and by the way, I just want to point out that UFO is a term coined by the intelligence community after they knew that they were neither unidentified nor did they fly. But that's another discussion about how a lexicon is created to control the mind and also to control the consciousness. But for convention, just to say, if you look at the literature on UFO encounters and sightings, you'll see that virtually all of the things that you would read in, say, the Vedic literature or in Yogananda's Autobiography of a Yogi, these craft do. They move straight through solid mountains. They go straight into the earth, even though they look like they would disintegrate and have a crash as they go into the earth. They have an interface with consciousness. They can bilocate. They can change form and kind of go through a morphing process. There have been many experiences where the same identical craft and beings have appeared in more than one place at the same time. In fact, we have a member of our team. Years ago, there was a very well-known actor and singer, Burl Ives, who had his wife had an experience where during the Northridge earthquake, as she was up in Anacortes, Washington, but she came downstairs early one morning, the day of that earthquake, and there was after I had introduced her to the ideas of contact and how to make contact, and she had started practicing the CSETI protocols that we're going to be teaching people at the conference in Rio Rico in October next month. What she found was that she started having these sightings, and these ET craft started appearing around her home there in Anacortes, Washington. Well, one morning when she came downstairs, there was a craft hovering right above her courtyard, fully materialized, at least appeared to be fully materialized, very visible with the naked eye, with a beam of light streaming into her foyer. And the extraterrestrials on board were saying, "Do not be afraid. We are always with you. You will be protected." At that instant, she just knew intuitively, psychically, somehow, she should call her best friend in L.A. And when she picked up the phone and called her, that person, a woman that she was very close with, was in the middle of the Northridge earthquake. And the identical spacecraft, absolutely identical, was outside her house with a stream of light coming into her window with the exact same thought and the exact same message coming into her mind that she should not be afraid, that they are always with us, and that she would be protected. And this happened as a way of showing to Dorothy Ives, Burl Ives' wife, that in fact these civilizations not only are very connected in consciousness and are here to very much to help and to protect Earth and her people, but also this amazing ability to literally bilocate for this exact same event to be happening at two places 1,000 miles apart between northern Washington State and Southern California at the exact same instant is the kind of thing that would seem confusing to a physicist at MIT, to say the least. But it isn't confusing to someone who has studied the Vedas. It isn't confusing to someone who studied the science of consciousness. And it isn't confusing to someone who understands the cosmology that extraterrestrial civilizations are utilizing in order to move between star systems or galaxies. And that's really what we want to focus on today.
And, you know, one of the most astonishing things I ever saw in this realm was my very first training in Joshua Tree in 1996 when we were driving out of the park, finished for the evening pretty much, and that huge craft that was the size of your fist at arm's length zoomed down from the sky and merged directly into the desert floor.
Oh, yes, and it lit up the entire national park.
Yeah. Yeah, it was just incredible, and it was materialized, and yet it emerged into the ground, and I mean that made a big impression. My very first training.
Well, I think this is the kind of thing that we continue to experience every expedition we go on in one way or another.
Right.
But what Linda's describing was a very sort of a seminal event that happened in November of or the fall of '96, and actually it happened where this craft went into the national park is precisely where we'll be doing our contact work in November in a couple of months in Joshua Tree National Park on the 1 week training that we do for ambassadors to the universe. And those of you who are so inclined are welcome to come to that, and you can find out more about that at cseti.org, cseti.org. And one of the things that was very interesting about that experience, sort of a prelude to it, is that I had been given a mental message just before this happened. We were at another site, and I was told that they weren't going to come right then and there, but they were going to be later. And I knew that we should move from that site. And so we were leaving the original site where we were located, and we were in our vehicles transporting back up towards the site that we now use. And just before this enormous, and it had to be several hundred feet in diameter, spacecraft that was shaped like a Hershey's Kiss, if you can visualize, flat on the bottom, and then it came up to sort of a top. And when it descended, it wasn't coming down at an angle. It appeared right over in the zenith of the sky, came straight down like a rock. And it was a beautiful teal blue color. And as it approached the Earth, of course, one was thinking that it would either have to stop or there would be an enormous explosion or crash. But it didn't. It simply merged into the Earth. And they were showing us an underground facility that the extraterrestrial civilizations utilize, or an area they utilize, that's in a protected area of this vast national park up above Palm Springs and in the high desert east of Los Angeles. So, interestingly, when this happened, I knew that that's what they were showing me. And that's why we've continued to do our contact work at this site ever since. But one of the things that happened just before it materialized is that there was an energy wave that came into my car, because I was sort of the leader of this group, and that was not visible, but that was electromagnetic. And all of the dashboard lights on the car, like for the radio and because it was at night, it was very late. I forget what time, 12.
About 1:30.
What time was it, Linda?
1:30.
It was about 1:30, so yeah, it was quite late. And as that happened, all of my dashboard lights dimmed down and then came back up. And Sherry Adamak was in the front seat, and one of my daughters was in the back seat. And I turned to them and I said, "They're coming." I knew what that meant. And at that, about 2 seconds later, the spacecraft materialized in the atmosphere and went straight into the Earth at just breathtaking speed. Now, one of the things that, of course, is very confusing for people is that, well, what kind of energy form was this spacecraft in? It was visible to everyone. I mean, there were about, 15, 16, 17 people who were there who saw this. But what kind of form would it be? Well, of course, if it had been conventionally materialized, like we think of a 747, it simply would have slammed into the rocks of the Earth and crashed. It didn't. So it was in a form that was almost like a plasma-like energy, or a brilliantly lit light craft that had shape and form, but obviously it was the matter of the spacecraft, the actual physical matter, was resonating at a frequency and at a resonant field that was faster than that of solid matter, so that it was able to go straight through solid matter without being injured. And this has been reported, by the way, in the UFO research literature for dozens of years. And perhaps even in ancient times, such mysterious things have been done. And a lot of times people have not understood how this would be possible. Is it an apparition? Is is it possible? And the answer to that is yes, it is. And now we even understand scientifically how this has happened. But it isn't by staying in linear three-dimensional space-time speed, and that the speed of light and the speed of the electrons of matter are simply way too slow for any civilization to have that as their operating paradigm and then travel between star systems. Because if you were to stay in that phase of energy, say 186,000 miles per second, which is the speed of light, you couldn't go from one star system to another that's a million light years away. If a star system, let's say the Andromeda galaxy, is 2.5 million light years away, and you're from one of the stars in that galaxy, which is very similar to the Milky Way galaxy, well, if you were traveling even at the speed of light, it would take you 2.5 million years to get here and 2.5 million years to get home. That's 5 million years. So clearly we're dealing with an understanding of science and technology that goes beyond what I have termed the crossing point of light. And when you go beyond the crossing point of light, the frequency and speed of light, you have entered into a realm that is this transdimensional aspect of reality that crosses over into what the mystics and the ancients used to call the astral and etheric energies and things of this sort. And yet it's technological and it is scientific. And so that's what we're dealing with these extraterrestrial civilizations and how they appear around us. And that's why, as Dr. J. Allen Hynek, the astronomer, the astrophysicist who used to work for the Air Force and who was doing all the cover-up work for the Project Blue Book, who later came clean and admitted that they had been covering these things up and admitted that we were being visited by extraterrestrial civilizations. He called this all high strangeness. And he termed it that because from his paradigm of Earth, 20th century, early 21st century astrophysics and things of this sort, it's just very strange. And yet I tell people, is it really that strange? And this is where I want to sort of deconstruct that and analyze that for a minute. Because one of the things that I think is very important for people to understand is that all of this is very exotic if you objectify it too far. And you say, well, it's some unapproachable, non-understandable phenomenon. But let's make it simple. Each one of us has a physical body. I mean, everyone right now, look at your body. You're sitting there on your couch or driving in your car, wherever you are. And yet, you also have within that physical body the body of light, the so-called astral body. And the proof of that, the greatest proof of that, is when you have a lucid flying dream. And I'm sure almost everyone listening has had a dream where they've been awake within the dream and flying over an area. And that you are literally moving and traveling with your astral body. And some people have been trained to do astral projection where they can do this at will or with some practice. But everyone has had it happen sort of spontaneously at night at some point, virtually everyone. And so you look at that and you go, well, what is that you may be asleep in your bed and your physical body is there asleep and snoring or doing whatever it's doing and it's breathing, and your astral body of light is suddenly awake and you're flying over the coastline of Costa Rica, such as I had happen once, and you're seeing the water and you're seeing the light from within the earth because you're seeing the astral and celestial energy of the earth itself. Or you're visiting a loved one, or you're seeing something. And many times people have had these sort of dreams, and they have then had it see something that happens the next day or the next month or in a year or sometime in the future. And there are entire books that have been written about these lucid dreams of the future. And that's because the subtle body, the astral body of light and the conscious body within it, has moved off of linear space-time, both time and space, and is able to see a remote place and a remote time. And that remote time is actually accessible because the nature of consciousness is that it's omnipresent and eternal, which means that the conscious mind is all places at all times, and that through these lucid dream experiences, you can see a distant place or a distant time. And this is why people have had, over the centuries and over the recorded history of human existence, had these sorts of precognitions and lucid dreaming experiences, and to the point that the Aboriginals in Australia literally have they call it dream time, where during the nighttime they visit each other, they make plans, they converse, and then the next day, even though they didn't have telecommunications, they would set it up that they would meet someplace in the outback at a certain place, and they would just appear there, and it would happen. And this was very routine. And many cultures that we consider, quote, primitive, had this as part of their operating paradigm. Now, that paradigm has been beaten out of Western education and civilization, but it still exists within each of us, even if we were raised in America and went to MIT or Harvard. So the point being that the reality of the consciousness of a human being is that we have our physical bodies. Within that is this body of light that we can fly around all over the universe with. Within that is what the mystics have called the causal body, which is just the pure idea form of what you are. That has within it sort of the resonant frequency tone, the music of your soul, that is your individuality. And then within that is the reality of just pure conscious awareness, which in its essence is this omnipresent universal being. And all of that is folded within each of us. Everyone hearing this discussion right now, think of that. So we don't have to be mystified, in a sense, by the kinds of amazing ways these extraterrestrial civilizations do appear, because if we understand our own selves and what our own potential is, we will understand very clearly how it is these interstellar civilizations can then study these sciences and develop technological interfaces with this aspect of reality, these trans-dimensional energies, so that this becomes something that is as routine as you and I speaking on a cell phone, which I point out to people, if we were to go back a few hundred years and talk to each other on a cell phone that had video capability and what have you, this would look absolutely like magic to the people in Salem, Massachusetts in the 17 or 1800s, and you would be burned at the stake as a witch. So we have to begin to understand that we're dealing with civilizations that have simply developed sciences and technologies that are transdimensional, that interface with thought, with consciousness, and with teleportation and transportation systems that utilize the ability to take a spacecraft that is physical, three-dimensional, and have its energy resonant frequency shift to this transdimensional component that looks very much like a sort of astral or etheric energy field, and then move at velocities multiple of the speed of light across the vast distances of space-time. Now, what's interestingly been observed by our group, and which is going to be recorded in this new book, which is going to be the most exciting book that we've ever released, I think. This book coming out is called Contact, Countdown to Transformation, and it will be available at disclosureproject.org in October sometime. We hope it will be delivered somewhere around mid-October. And everyone coming to the conference in Arizona, October 24th, 25th, and 26th, will be given a copy of that, as well as this amazing DVD of all these experiences we've had and images of how the UFO ET craft have appeared around us. I think that what you have to understand is that these particular civilizations that are interstellar, by virtue of the fact that they're here, have that ability, but they can then take it and go between the realm of say astral and etheric energy and material energy and be somewhere in between. But what is the in between? Well, this gets into a very interesting. It's sort of like, you remember the old-fashioned radios that you grew up with, if you're old enough to remember, from the 60s, and instead of everything being digital, you would turn a knob And as you turn the knob, you would be on one channel, and you turn it a little more, and there'd be another channel. But if you were really careful, you could kind of be between two channels. Mm-hmm. And you could hear two at once. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about these civilizations having the technological ability to literally be in our space-time and yet shifted just enough out that they're not quite solid, or they'll appear only as the standing tone of the craft. You'll just hear a tone, which is what we recorded, or we will see a light, a burst of light, or an orb that'll move through, or we will have something that looks exactly like the spacecraft, but it's not quite solid. It's not quite as concrete as linear space-time matter, like our bodies or the rocks that we walk upon, and that it will be in a form where it can then easily slip between the atoms and molecules of Earth and go into the Earth, as we saw in Joshua Tree. And we've seen this happen, and we actually have this filmed, where we have these brilliant bursts of light that come within 50 to 100 feet of our team and are there, and it'll just be this burst of light, and it's actually an entire extraterrestrial spacecraft. But the only thing you're seeing and recording with our imaging equipment are these objects. And so, interestingly, the ETs know this, and they do this with great alacrity, with great ease, as they slip transdimensionally from fully materialized to partially materialized and visible to completely invisible, except perhaps you'll just sense an energy field. It looks like a heat wave in the desert or something like that, to not even that. And all that'll be there will be a feeling that it's there. Now, we have a person that we've worked with who's in Australia who had such an experience. And it's interesting because this is on our website. If you go to cseti.org and look at some of the pictures that are associated with this conference that we're doing in Rio Rico, Arizona next month, where we're going to have a couple of hundred people making mass contact together. It's going to be very exciting. And Colin Andrews, the famous crop circle researcher, will be with us, as will Dr. Lynn Katai, who of the Phoenix Lights experiences, and also Dr. Ted Loder on the new energy front. And what we're going to be doing is making this sort of contact with 200 people under the stars. It's going to be an astonishing experience in mass consciousness. But when you look at this particular part of the website, you'll see there's a photograph there, and it was taken in Australia a few years ago. And I'm blocking on the lady's name, Linda.
Dickman, Kathy Dickman.
Yes, Kathy Dickman, a wonderful person. And what happened with that is that she was outside near her house where she lives in Australia, and she felt with her heart and her mind that the ETs were there, but she didn't see a thing with the naked eye. Now, her dog, I think was a golden retriever, sensed it and went straight to it and actually went into the water, which it normally did not do, particularly at night, to go near it and be under it. So she took up a small, digital camera, like, a pocket camera that everyone has now, and took a picture in that area, and it took a series of pictures. And you could see clear as a bell this disc-shaped, very close range ET craft that was there, totally invisible, but the strobe of the flash of her camera excited the energy field of that space it was taking up, and it then reflected back in the sort of ultraviolet range, so it looks very bright white, almost like a fluorescent light with a little blue tinge to it. And we have had this happen many, many times. And so you could walk straight through this spacecraft. You could never see it in daytime or nighttime with the naked eye, and yet with the correct frequency, and just by accident in this case, this camera put out the correct frequency of light, there it was on the picture. Now, we had a very similar thing happen at the Outer Banks this past May of this year, 2009, where Raven Nabulsi, and you can see this photograph as well on our website, where she had the same thing, felt, and she just took a picture of sky, and it was not, she didn't even, there was nothing she was taking, but she could feel it, and in the picture is a disc-shaped craft that was hovering right off from our house where we were located on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. And, of course, this happened right after we had the famous event that happened where this huge craft had flown into the ocean of the exact same shape and size and then came up on the beach as just as 3 lights that went on and off over 100 times over an hour period, and were signaling to us about 90 feet from the group, and we filmed it. That was filmed, and that was seen with the naked eye. But this she did not see with the naked eye. It was only picked up by the camera's digital field, but it was daytime, not nighttime in this case.
Yeah.
So they can be all around us, is my point, and you can feel them with your heart and see them with your mind often before you see them with your eyes. And this is one of the things we train people to do to make contact, because you're not dealing with a conventional cosmology of astrophysics and sort of material sciences. That has all been known for 100 years on Earth. So quantum mechanics is 100 years old now. Now we're talking about where the real action is, and that's where things shift beyond the crossing point of light, and you can have an entire spacecraft within literally a few feet of you, 90 feet of you, as we did on the Outer Banks, and it all that's visible is a light that's there signaling on and off. Very unusual, and this is what Dr. J. Allen Hynek would call high strangeness. Not to mention the fact that they then interface directly with thought and consciousness. So frequently people will be given an image in their minds, or will be sent a thought in their minds by the ETs. And it's very important that people understand that interstellar civilizations that are physical, and they have spacecraft and bodies just like we have 747s and the space shuttle and bodies, but they have technologies that are using thought. Conveyance systems, what I call consciousness-assisted technologies, and also technology-assisted consciousness, where the technology assists with the projection of thought and consciousness across vast distances with great accuracy. That what you're seeing is this interface where there is an integration of the reality of our own existence, as I just mentioned, of having pure consciousness that is within us, and our existence, our sound of our causal body, our thought body, the essence of our individuality, and then our physical, our astral body that serves as sort of a architectural blueprint or template for the physical body itself, and then you have your physical body. So all these dimensions are not far away. They're folded within us. And this is why I often use this quote from the ancient Sufi tradition that goes something like this. They say, thinkest thyself a puny form when within thee the universe is folded? And it's a rhetorical question. Indeed, the entirety of the cosmos and the universe is folded within every single one of us. And this is what is so amazing. And that's if you understand that, then you understand that the irony here is that with all the tens of millions of dollars that the SETI project, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence that has been associated with NASA, has spent with their giant telescopes and radio telescopes, notwithstanding that they have covered up some of the contact they've had because they've been ordered to. The fact of the matter is that we have had contact that has been happening through the SETI effort with no funding to speak of at all, through all volunteer efforts, for 19 years all over the world, using electronics where they come through our electromagnetic detectors, our radar detectors, our laser detectors, our magnetometers, our digital imaging equipment. And we don't have anything that costs more than $5,000. We don't have a $50 million radio telescope. And what's interesting about it is that when you look at that, it makes sense, because the extraterrestrial civilizations are easily able to interface with us in ways that are commensurate with their understanding of the cosmos. And I tell people we need to go a little way into their understanding, a little way. And the best way to do it is to understand the knowledge of the World Puja Network brings to the world of the Vedas and consciousness and the science of consciousness. Because this is really the big science of the next 1,000 or several thousand years on Earth. And there is an interface where thought and conscious awareness interfaces with electromagnetics, magnetism, physical reality, and three-dimensional space-time and matter. And that's what SETI is actually observing and experiencing when we make contact. It happens on all of these levels. And that's why it's such an exciting undertaking, because once you understand that you have everything you need once you gain this knowledge and a little bit of experience. And there are a few technological things we do use that facilitate this sort of contact, that you can make contact with these civilizations if you have the right attitude. The attitude being universal peace, that you do this not because you're trying to entertain yourself or even make them show themselves to you to prove anything, because if you need to go back, go look at some UFO pictures, they're out there. What you really want to be doing is doing this because you sincerely want to be a bridge from Earth civilization and humanity to these interstellar civilizations. That's what they've been waiting for certainly since the dawn of the nuclear era, when they've been waiting for humans to change the direction we're on and become a peaceful civilization that's capable of going out into space with them together in peace. And that's what we're trailblazing. This is what the pioneering effort of CSETI.org is doing. And that's why we're inviting everyone to come to this conference in Rio Rico to become ambassadors to the universe and do this together out under the stars for 3 nights, and to learn of these things, and to learn of how these extraterrestrial and transdimensional civilizations are interfacing in many different ways, including with the crop circles that we've been studying, and which Colin Andrews is the world's authority on, and he will be there sharing the state-of-the-art information on that. So, which is really quite astonishing what's been happening just in the last few months. So the cosmology and how extraterrestrials interface with it is very important to understand. It's really the key to making contact, because without that understanding, you're going to be locked into a three-dimensional paradigm, which is valid only to a point, and then you're lost. Then you're completely lost, and it's just going to seem like strangeness. It's not going to make any sense to you, which is why it's very important that people understand the entire range of the cosmos, ranging from consciousness and causal and thought and astral and etheric and physical three-dimensional, and everything that's contained within it. Now, interestingly, part of what's contained within that whole spectrum of reality, if I can call it that, it's like the full spectrum of, it's like full spectrum light. This is full spectrum reality. And if you look at this rainbow of full spectrum reality, within that are other beings that are not extraterrestrial, angelic, celestial, the worlds that are astral and not physical three-dimensional, where there are beings, the world of our ancestors, those who have dropped the physical body and are in the spirit body. And, of course, people have studied this with ghosts and poltergeist and all kinds of other transdimensional aspects. Now, one of the things is not to confuse these things. It's not, on one level, all this is that, and all of pure consciousness manifests all that there is. On another level, there is relativity. And as the old Persian saying goes, you would not pluck out your eyeball as easily as you cut your fingernails. And there's a value to having some knowledge of the relativity of this sort of cosmology and understanding it. And I had a very interesting conversation years ago at the Vatican with Monsignor Balducci, who was a senior theologian to the last pope. And we were discussing this, and he gave me a wonderful interview, which is in the book Disclosure, which you can get at disclosureproject.org. And Monsignor Balducci and I were talking about this issue, and we were talking about how many people confuse extraterrestrial the manifestation of extraterrestrial sciences and technologies, because it is transdimensional, they will confuse it with spirit beings or an angelic being or even a demonic being. And he said, one of the interesting things about it is that, and I'll never forget it when he said this, yes, he said in a very thick Italian accent, he said, angels do not require flying saucers. And I said, absolutely. So the interstellar civilizations that still have physical planets and physical spacecraft and physical bodies that use spacecraft and are traveling and have technologies, they have technologies that cross into the astral and etheric. And the ones that are multiple millions of years more developed and evolved than we are on Earth today are at a level of consciousness, of pure God consciousness, where they are actually at the celestial level of understanding, where the celestial technologies are put into application and can manifest entire spacecraft and manifest beings. And this is what we've been experiencing in many of our contacts around the world, not only at Joshua Tree, but also at Mount Shasta and at the Outer Banks, is where we'll have these civilizations that are the guardian civilizations of life on Earth, that on the one hand are celestial, but at the same time are extraterrestrial. Now, there are celestial beings that are not extraterrestrial, that are purely within the celestial realm. And this then causes people to get rather wide-eyed when they realize the implications of what I'm just saying, and that is that there are civilizations that are interstellar and extraterrestrial and have physical planets and bodies, but whose consciousness and whose technologies have evolved to such a point that they are operative at the celestial level. And it's beautiful. When you see it, when you experience it, it is absolutely breathtaking and beautiful.
It's totally amazing. And you're mentioning the celestials and the ETs and also the Native American presence we feel quite strongly at all of our field sites. The CSETI trainings are just a wonderful place to practice your discernment about all of these different beings from these different realms, because when you can tune in and you can really feel the difference and detect a Native American spiritual presence separately from how you feel when a celestial is present or an ET is present.
Yes, and what's interesting is some of the most amazing contact events we've had. We have had an extraterrestrial spacecraft that is doing something that is physically visible or can be filmed or heard or what have you, and at the same time there will be an avatar being there with a celestial, sort of like the concourse on high of the high celestials, with ancestral beings that are there. One year at Mount Shasta, we actually had a pre-Homo sapien denizen of Earth. In other words, an intelligent life form that lived on Earth millions of years ago, maybe, we don't know how long ago, before Homo sapiens evolved, that manifested in the field to the east of us and let out a cry that was heard by everyone in the circle.
Right.
It was astonishing and magnificent and beautiful. At the same time, we were having, and that ancient being that was of a pre-Homo sapien, pre-human Earth being, manifested because they had been in that same area of the Earth near Mount Shasta before Homo sapiens. Even native peoples of humans had been there and had done the same contact protocols we're doing now, and he was honoring that. And that was one of the most amazing things. And those are the kinds of things that happen where we will have an extraterrestrial spacecraft or some manifestation of an extraterrestrial civilization, whether it's electronic tones or electronic equipment going off. At the same time, there will be a celestial presence, and many times people will then pick up that there's an ancestral presence, whether a native or one of our own ancestors, someone maybe a loved one who's passed on to the worlds of light and dropped the physical body but is in their astral body and who is very supportive of the work we're doing. And frequently, Sherry Adamak, who had helped me start CSETI back in the early days and who died in 1998, will appear and be present at the same time we're having a fully materialized overflight of this spacecraft that is this bluish-white, gorgeous craft that comes in from space and flies over that I call Kindness, because it has a senior extraterrestrial diplomat on board who is about 5 feet tall and has a perfectly round head and the most beautiful eyes, no hair, and she is sort of a manifestation of complete kindliness and compassion. And I was actually introduced to this ET by Sherry Adamak the very night Sherry Adamak passed away in a lucid dream that I had. And since then, this spacecraft has shown up virtually at every single one of these expeditions that we have undertaken. It'll be curious to see if she comes to this one in Arizona next month with a couple of hundred people present, because we've never done this with so many people. It's going to be an interesting sort of experiment and expedition for all of us. And what I think people have to understand is that if you add to your current understanding of spirituality and the fact that we have a physical body as well as a spirit body and consciousness and the spiritual realm, and you add to that the understanding that interstellar civilizations capable of going faster than the speed of light, which are the only ones that can reach here. You have to understand, if you can't go faster than the speed of light, you can't go from one star system to another because you'd be dead. Your physical body would be dead before you got there. You are dealing with civilizations that understand this Vedic knowledge. By definition, they get it. They have to have gotten it. They have to have mastered it, even to the level of the cities, the SIDDHIS, the abilities to apply the science of consciousness into technological and transdimensional systems. It has to be understood by them. And it needs to be understood by us. If it isn't understood by us, we're going to be sitting there missing 90 to 99% of how these extraterrestrial civilizations are interfacing with us, with Earth, with Gaia, which is a conscious living organism, and with the spirit world. And so I think this understanding, this whole concept of extraterrestrials and this new cosmology, which I first wrote back in 1996, I believe it was, is a really critical understanding that we share with people, because without that understanding, there isn't going to be an ability to experience properly how all the inter-civilizations are going to be interfacing with us, because they're going to be interfacing in ways that are not, fully materialized all the time. And even if they are fully materialized, there are other things going on simultaneously. And here's a good example. When we have had an object that fully materialized, that is visible to everyone and filmed or what have you, at the same time, there is bilocated on the site a astral projection electronically, if you want to look at it this way, sort of a high-tech electronic astral projection of the spacecraft and all the beings on it on top of the circle, superimposed on that space. And you can look around the circle and you can actually see scintillating areas of light and movement, very subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, where they'll then move around and then come over and actually make a detector go off or make a magnetometer go off and shift the magnetic field. And the spacecraft may have just appeared briefly, but then it's there literally superimposed on space-time around us with all this other extraordinary manifestations of extraterrestrial technology and contact happening. And this is something which really, and even to the point of changing the polarity on our compasses, where on Blanca Peak in 1997, after a prolonged contact with 12 of these very advanced extraterrestrial elders, I had a compass in my breast pocket, and when I took it out during the daytime, after this contact event happened, the north on the compass was shifted to south, and it stayed that way for a month. And this whole account is going to be in this new book as well. And it's like, what is that about? Where the actual magnetic field of a compass is shifted 180 degrees. And it's interesting because the compass was over my heart, in a breast pocket in my jacket, over the heart chakra. And the heart is electromagnetic. And so much of what was happening was deeply emotional and very loving and very spiritual, and yet it literally altered this physical thing. It's just a typical plastic compass with a needle in it and the fluid in the center. And it's beautiful to see the sort of evidences that are left and the sort of proofs that are left, but the real action is happening in the sciences of consciousness. And that's why we spend a lot of time studying that and teaching it, and also teaching, we're going to do a puja for all of the 150 to 200 people who are going to be at this event in Arizona next month. And we're going to initiate people into the meditation techniques and the learning of remote viewing and the techniques of consciousness, of science, of consciousness and contact. Because it's very important for people to understand that getting grounded in that state of consciousness is not only important for understanding the ETs, but also in being able to make contact and to remain calm during a contact event. And unless you can be on a deeper level of consciousness than your own egotistical sort of animal state, you're just going to be overwhelmed when one of these massive spacecraft materialize within feet of you. And so one of the things that I train people in is this ability to become centered and calm and the mind to become pure and to go into that state of quiet awareness and experience that samadhi state, the state of pure mind itself. And that's a lot of what we'll be doing at night out under the stars in Arizona next month, is not only discussing this, but also teaching these techniques and doing group meditations together out under the stars. So this understanding of the cosmology is so key, and as Linda just mentioned, it isn't just that the ETs will show up, which they have, but we'll also have other beings show up. But it's important to be able to have discernment between, is it a spirit being, is it an ancestor, is it an angelic being, is it an extraterrestrial being using a transdimensional system of understanding, or what? So in order to really have that discernment, one has to understand this new cosmology and see how it's all integrated and how it is that these civilizations that are interstellar are utilizing this full spectrum of reality and have a clear understanding of it. Certainly, if it's been recorded in the ancient Vedas and known on Earth for thousands of years, it certainly is known by these other interstellar civilizations.
Right, and we get the opportunity to practice it and learn it ourselves, which one thing that never fails to amaze me is when you see often the ET craft or the ET beings will appear as subtle sparkles. And these sparkles fill our circle that we're sitting in the field. And this has happened literally hundreds of times where we break our circle for the night and walk, like in Mount Shasta last month, walk maybe 75 feet to our vehicles and feel a dramatic 15 to 20 degree temperature difference. Our circle has been so warm because of the energy of these beings, and it is just utterly palpably colder, not 50 to 75 feet away.
Right, and that happens almost every time because the craft is actually etherically there. It's actually superimposed on space-time, and it's holding the energy. It's literally holding the physical energy. And that's why we're having all these electromagnetic and other things. Now, to someone who isn't trained in this, they would just see an empty field with people sitting in it. And yet there are all these measurable. We actually have thermal measuring devices now that can measure how high up the craft is going, even though it's invisible to the naked eye.
Right.
And so it gets into a whole area of interesting experiences, which we're going to share with everyone. And those of you who can join us, I hope to see you there in Arizona next month on October 24th and 25th and 26th. You can find out more about that at cseti.org/contact. And also, if you want to join us at Joshua Tree National Park, we're going to be there for an entire week on an expedition with a smaller group, probably around 40 people, up out in the Joshua Tree National Park wilderness at this contact site where this massive spacecraft landed and went into the Earth in 1996, where we've had so many amazing experiences. So I hope to see you at one of these events, and you can learn more about this at cseti.org, and you can order the meditation tapes and instruction kit and books at disclosureproject.org. Well, I think we're out of time. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, and particularly thank the World Puja Network and Linda Willitts for all of her help and being with me today. And we will see, I hope, all of you soon at one of these events.
Okay.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.